After spending the best part of 10 years in prison between the year 2000 and 2009, I found myself becoming what they call institutionalised. Now, most prisoners, so two-thirds of prisoners, end up back in prison within 2 years of being released. Now, this isn't because it's some sort of holiday camp, Butlin sort of resort that you can't wait to get back to. It's because most people who are in prison, and once you've been in prison for a long time especially, find that you have trouble coping and adjusting being back in real life. Now, what I'm going to talk about today is just how it affected me, myself, and how it can affect other people as well. So I had real trouble coping on the outside with basic day-to-day tasks sometimes. My life was kind of chaotic as it was. I always ended up going off the rails. But I had problems coping with real life, as in sort of paying bills, paying rent, dealing with landlords, and kind of, outside influences on my life. Because essentially I've been raised in jail. My home life before going to prison was quite chaotic, so weirdly, I learned a lot of the things about taking care of myself as an adult. I learned in prison, which was kind of fucked up. But that left me when I left prison. It's kind of 28, and all the little times in between that I was out for a few weeks or a few months. It left me with a kind of a fucked up reward system, but also a really basic way of with dealing with problems. So I remember one instance going out to nightclubs. I think it was one of the first times. I think I got out in December, and the kind of first time I was going to go out in kind of a busy situation was a nightclub at New Year's Eve, and I kind of felt quite anxious about it, and I knew I wasn't going to be coping very well with it. So my partner at the time and her friends all went out first, and I kind of said I was going to join them about 11 o'clock to kind of limit my time, being stressed out by this. Because what I found at this point was I'd been in prison about 2 or 3 times at this point, and prison's quite a violent place, and it can be quite chaotic, and I had a real problem being in crowds. So when I found that when I was in a nightclub situation, and there is things kicking off, and certain areas sometimes, and even though it's not like prison, and everyone's in there for fucking this and that. Half the fucking nightclub's going to be girls anyway, so they're not generally going to be attacking me. But I'd always find that you'd find yourself with your back to the wall. You're constantly kind of looking around. In prison, you can sometimes, because the person who's going to attack you isn't going to be looking at you, so you sometimes have to look at the reactions of other people. Are they kind of looking over at you and then kind of looking at something else, or are people kind of consciously not making eye contact with you and that sort of thing. So you're sometimes looking at the reactions that you aren't getting rather than the ones you are as well. So it can be, like I say, it can be stressful and difficult. But so I found I was having real anxiety about going out in nightclub situations, and I found myself sweating uncontrollably, and it looked like I'd just been running. Someone asked me if I'd ran down there. It was embarrassing, and it was difficult. But over time, obviously nothing happens. But it gets better, and you can cope with real life more. But for those first few weeks and months, the only thing I can kind of equate it to really is coming out of the army. And I know people who have suffered with post-traumatic stress coming out of the army and the navy and things like this. One of my friends was a helicopter pilot, or one of my friend's partners, was a helicopter pilot, and they were in a supermarket, and someone dropped something and it made a bang, and he hit the deck with his hands over his head, because that was his normal reaction after coming back from Afghanistan, and it really kind of stresses him out, and that obviously I wasn't in a war zone, but it can be very similar to a war zone, the way you're always on a heightened tension and heightened stress. So that was something I kind of struggled with as well. Another one was, different restaurant settings and going out and ordering food and things like this. And pubs, I was always very comfortable in a pub. You where you are in a pub, but in things like Subway, Subway popped up in the time that I'd been in prison. And even though it looks like a bit of a prison canteen as you're going through it, I had no idea, because they're kind of, you've got all the menus on the walls and things, but it's, there's also, they're asking you, what do you want? What salads do you want? And for me, I had no idea that, it's unlimited. You can get what you want. I'm thinking, do I get like one or two or, this? And, just even ordering a sandwich, chain like that was really stressful for me. And, I'd find myself either having to get someone else to order for me, or just not go there at all. Just because of the simple fact that it freaked me out so much, just having to do sort of simple things like that. It wasn't till, maybe a year or two after I got out of prison that I actually started setting my bills up on direct debits. I used to pay everything cash, because to me, setting bills up and things like that was always one more thing that I had to cancel when I got banged up. So I would generally pay for all my bills in cash, just so it left me, a much simpler, much simpler time when I eventually got sent to prison. So yeah, it wasn't until I'd come out and I'd settled down with my now wife, and we ended up, like I say, putting down roots. I could actually get a mobile phone contract rather than always having to pay as you go, that sort of thing. So, with time, obviously normality came, and I was able to deal with things a lot better. But it is, and it's not just something that I know that other people have dealt with this as well. So I was reading the book Frankie Fraser. He was obviously an old school gangster, and he spent 42 years in prison. He's got a really interesting book if you want to read that. And he says in the book that when he came out, he spent the first year just in the house. He didn't leave the house. Now I can't even imagine what kind of 42 years in prison would do to you. But it's nuts. But I can completely understand spending the year in the house, because just the outside world would be far too chaotic. You're talking several generations. That's going from maybe being a couple of cars on your road to the whole town being flooded with vehicles. One interesting thing, if you want to kind of look it up, if you want to see visually what prison can do to you, and what being inside, how it will visually affect you, is to watch the Tommy Robinson interview with Ross Kemp. And I think he only spent something like 6 weeks inside. It may have been 3 months, I'm not sure. It was only a short amount of time. But you see him being, sitting in the cell, quite cocky to start with. And then it kind of quickly cuts to the, when he's getting out, and you just see him, and he's broken. You can just tell he's broken from having to spend that time inside. And now he was in kind of, like the celebrity solitary. So a lot of these celebrity criminals will end up, rightly or wrongly, getting, a cell all to themselves. They get all the luxuries of being, enhanced and everything. They get all the food, telly, blah, blah, blah. But they barely leave the cell. So it's like being on basic, but being enhanced, weirdly. So, he had all the luxuries. So he didn't do, difficult time. He just did solitary time. And if you look in his eyes, you can see he's broken after that. And it's very interesting to watch. So have a look at that if you can. Now, one of the things that's a bit of a weird kink from coming out of prison is that when I first came out, I had this real obsession with time, because obviously it's all you think about. You tick off the days, the weeks, the months, counting down the days till you get out. Obviously it's all you think about, sometimes there's years on end sometimes. So I found myself when I came out that I had a real kind of OCD with time, and all of my clocks and all of my digital alarms and things like that all had to be exactly the same, and they all had to tick over at the same time. And again, this is something I broke out of. It's not something that kind of stuck with me forever, but it was just a kind of repercussion of that weird kind of environment that you're in, that you become so obsessed with time, like I say, that it just, everything had to be exactly the same. After my first time in prison, when I spent 2 years at Portland, I did find that I was a bit shell-shocked when I came out. Now, what I mean by this is that, I didn't become a mute, but it was just difficult to get conversation out of me unless I was drinking. And alcohol was a bit of a problem for me when I first came out, because obviously, I hadn't done any drugs, I hadn't, drank or anything for a couple of years, and I'd gone from a real party lifestyle to, being in prison for all that time. And then, I got out and I wasn't processing everything properly. I didn't deal with things properly, and I found myself becoming, quite withdrawn from people. But also, I was drinking every day as well. So, yeah, it was weird. It was like I say, I was really withdrawn. I remember the little place where I did get a job. They when I saw them again afterwards, they just said to me like, "Yeah, we thought you were some sort of weirdo. You never really spoke." But I just spent 2 years in Portland trying to keep my head, below the waterline, so that I didn't get picked on, because I'd had a really traumatic experience. If you haven't heard my story from Portland, I was getting bullied. That's just thrown in with all sorts of weirdos and war criminals and Jamaican gangsters, and yeah, it was a crazy time. So yeah, I understood this when I got out. So when I got out for the final time in sort of 2009, I basically knew that I couldn't go off as quickly out of the traps as I'd always done. And by that I meant, I normally went out partying, blew all my money, ended up having to go and rob people within the first week or sell drugs within the first week just to keep my head above water. So this time I was staying in a bail hostel because I had nowhere to go. Nobody to put me up anymore. So I went and got myself a little telly, like you get in prison. One of the little fucking, what is it, like 10-inch tellies or whatever the fuck it is. I sat in there. I sat in my room watching telly. I went out for walks. I trained. I went to the gym. Like I would have done in prison. I ended up getting myself a little job, a little manual labour job. Like you would do in prison. And for those first few months, it was just an objective just to stay out and try and keep myself out of trouble and out of prison. But I kind of gave myself, excuse me, I gave myself, almost like a prison surrounding. So it was very, very comfortable to me, very, very familiar to me. But it was obviously going to keep me out of prison and not get me in trouble. And it worked. It worked for what it was supposed to do. So yeah, being institutionalized, trying to break that cycle of coming in, going out, coming in, going out, that sort of thing. It becomes very easy. I've said it before that after a little while, life on the outside is hard. You really have to try hard to survive on the outside and live crime free when that's all you've known. But in prison, it's not difficult at all. It becomes quite easy. Everything's taken care of for you. You don't have to worry about food or bills or anything like that. You just have to worry about not getting picked on, keeping your head above water, and living some sort of comfortable life in jail. And it becomes very, very easy for someone like me. But it's not something you want to do, or I'm advocating any way, shape or form. But being institutionalized, that's one of the major problems and one of the major reasons that people come in and out. And it's so sad when you see these people and they've been in for 20 years and but just for small sentences, and they just keep coming in and out and in and out. And again, like I say, they've got no way of coping on the outside, and prison's just all too easy for them, and it's quite a comfortable environment in the end. All right, so thank you very much for listening. Hopefully we'll get some more videos out soon. Have a listen. I've got an interview series coming soon, little mini series. I've got 3 or 4 interviews that we've done and we're getting done, so they'll be coming out very soon. But yeah, thank you. Cheers.